Have you ever heard of a king who was also a philosopher, a composer, and a military genius, all rolled into one? It sounds like a character from a fantasy novel, but this man was real. His name was Frederick II, better known as Frederick the Great, the king who transformed the small kingdom of Prussia into a European powerhouse. Frederick's story begins in 1712. He wasn't your typical prince. His father, King Frederick William I, was known as the Soldier King. He was obsessed with the military, discipline, and all things practical. He built up a formidable army, famous for its tall soldiers, the Potsdam Giants. He expected his son and heir to be just like him, a tough, no-nonsense military man. But young Frederick had other ideas. He loved music, poetry, and philosophy. He secretly learned to play the flute, read French literature, and corresponded with Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire. He found the military drills and court life dreadfully boring. This created a huge rift between father and son. Frederick William would publicly humiliate and even beat his son for his unmanly interests. The tension reached a breaking point when Frederick was 18. He and his close friend, Hans Hermann Bunkat, planned to escape to England. But their plan was discovered. The king was furious. He had both of them arrested and charged with treason. In a truly brutal act, he forced Frederick to watch from his prison cell window as his best friend, Kat, was bitten. It was a traumatic event that would scar Frederick for life, but it also taught him a harsh lesson in obedience and the realities of power. He buckled down, submitted to his father's will, and began to study statecraft and military affairs in earnest. When his father died in 1740, Frederick inherited the throne of Prussia. He also inherited a well-drilled army and a full treasury. Everyone in Europe expected the poet king to focus on arts and culture. They were in for a shock. Just months into his reign, the ruler of the Austrian Habsburg Empire died, leaving his throne to his daughter, Maria Theresa. Citing a flimsy legal pretext, Frederick saw his chance. He invaded the rich Austrian province of Silesia, kicking off the War of the Austrian Succession. This was an incredibly bold and risky move. Prussia was small compared to the mighty Austrian Empire, but Frederick's army was disciplined, and he proved to be a surprisingly brilliant commander. He led his troops from the front, sharing their hardships and inspiring them with his courage. He introduced new tactics, emphasizing speed, mobility, and surprise attacks. His oblique order tactic, where he would concentrate his forces on one flank of the enemy, became legendary. After years of fighting, Prussia won, and Silesia was officially theirs. Frederick had doubled his kingdom's population and resources in a single stroke. He had arrived on the world stage, but Maria Theresa of Austria never forgave him. She spent years building alliances to reclaim Silesia. This led to the 7 Years' War, which some historians call the First True World War. Prussia was surrounded. Frederick found himself fighting against Austria, France, Russia, Sweden, and several smaller German Staaten, seemingly impossible coalition. It was Prussia against the world. These years were the ultimate test of Frederick's genius and resolve. He was massively outnumbered and outgunned. His kingdom was invaded from all sides, and Berlin itself was occupied. He suffered devastating defeats and was often on the brink of total collapse. At one point he carried a vial of poison, ready to take his own life rather than be captured. But he never gave up. He raced his army from one front to another, fighting battle after battle, winning stunning victories against overwhelming odds. The battles of Rosbach and Leuthen are textbook examples of his military brilliance, where he defeated armies more than twice the size of his own. He wasn't just a general, he was also a master of diplomacy and resilience. He kept his army supplied and his state running despite the immense pressure. His stubborn refusal to surrender earned him the nickname Old Fritz from his soldiers, a term of both respect and affection. The war was a brutal meat grinder, costing hundreds of thousands of lives. Just when all seemed lost, a miracle happened. The Tsarina of Russia, one of his most bitter enemies, died. Her successor was a great admirer of Frederick and immediately pulled Russia out of the war. This miracle of the House of Brandenburg shattered the enemy coalition. Exhausted, the remaining powers eventually agreed to a peace treaty that left Prussia in control of Silesia. Frederick had survived. Against all odds, he had cemented Prussia's status as a major European power. The 7 Years' War had been devastating, but it proved that Prussia was here to stay. After the wars, Frederick turned his attention back to his kingdom. He wasn't just a warmonger. He saw himself as the first servant of the state. He implemented sweeping reforms inspired by the Enlightenment ideals he had loved in his youth. He reformed the justice system, abolishing torture and promoting religious tolerance, famously saying that in his kingdom, everyone can find salvation in his own way. He encouraged agriculture, draining swamps to create new farmland and introducing the potato, which became a staple food for the poor. He also promoted education and the arts, building the beautiful Sanssouci Palace in Potsdam, a personal retreat where he could compose music, write poetry, and philosophize. However, his reign had its contradictions. While he spoke of freedom and reason, he was an absolute monarch who maintained a rigid social structure with a powerful nobility. His wars, though successful, came at a tremendous human cost, and while he promoted religious tolerance, he held personal prejudices against certain groups. He was a complex figure, a philosopher who commanded armies, an artist who practiced ruthless power politics. By the time he died in 1786, Frederick the Great had left an indelible mark on history. He had taken a second-rate German state and, through sheer force of will, military genius, and relentless ambition, forged it into a great power. He laid the military and administrative foundations that would eventually lead to the unification of Germany. Under Prussian leadership, a century later, his tactics were studied by generals for generations, including Napoleon Bonaparte, who, upon visiting Frederick's tomb, said, "Hats off, gentlemen. If he were alive, we would not be here." He showed the world that a small kingdom with a disciplined army and a brilliant, determined leader could challenge empires and change the map of Europe forever.